Okay, so welcome everyone. We are, under the circumstances, not thrilled to be back talking about this, but I think we're going to be interviewing someone who might have a lot of insight into some of the things that could have happened in a similar case. So we have Derek Galanis here today, who is the brother of, what's his first name? Jason Galanis. Too many Jasons to remember.
Thank you for joining, Derek. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. As I was saying earlier, I read the article from The Sun that they contacted you about to be interviewed, and man, that's interesting. And just off the top, I wanted to say that Derek does have a book out called Greed and Fear, The Galanis Crime Family. I will link it in the comments or in the caption of this video. So if anyone wants to take a look, I think it would be great research for a case like this. So maybe I can hand the mic over to you, Derek, for just a moment to explain, what your upbringing was like, because it sounds like it's probably very different from the average childhood upbringing. So yeah, maybe you can go and explain what it was like to be part of that family.
So, I think if you're talking about my upbringing, you have to talk about privilege, and the type of things that privilege gives, and that is a part of this whole story with Hunter. I'm sure with Jason Sugarman, I don't know about his childhood, but he certainly married well, didn't he? Yeah. So, look, I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, which essentially is the Beverly Hills of the East Coast. And I lived there till I was about 14, maybe 13. And my father was busted on what was then thought to be the largest white-collar case of all time. And he received what was then the largest white-collar sentence of all time, 27 years. And that's where my life bifurcated.
You were 13 at the time?
I was 13 when they arrested him, yeah.
Wow. That's a big thing to happen as a young teen.
Well, it's funny. I was reading one of Sister Soldier's books called The Coldest Winter Ever. And, in that book, they're describing a girl named Winter. And they were describing the bust of her father, who seemed to be a Dominican or Puerto Rican drug dealer. But if you look at Winter's perspective as a child, and the way the feds came in and ruined her life and turned it upside down, there was no difference between Winter, who was an inner city girl with a rich drug dealing father, or myself, who was a privileged Greenwich kid with what I termed in the book an underground financier father, a criminal father in the finance world.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And maybe you can explain, like, what did you notice as a kid? Were you aware that he was involved in crime or doing anything wrong? Or was he just seen as the father figure who was, quite wealthy and worked in the finance business?
No, look, so, and this, I think, goes through all underground financiers. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was the exact same for Jason Sugarman. But an apotheosis, and I wrote about this in the book, happened in my house where my father became God. We didn't have God. We didn't have church. We had the Church of John Galanis. He was literally a deity in the home. And so his approval was like God's approval. And, my older brother, Jason, worked very hard to get that. And I worked hard in my own way to get it too. It's just my father saw our uses as different. But he was definitely God in the house. I'm sure for Jason Sugarman, it was the exact same way. I know for my brother, Jason Galanis, he was God in his house as well. He didn't have any children, but certainly he was idolized by his wife.
Okay. And so that is really interesting. And I can envision that kind of a family structure in my mind. So was your mother then what was her role in the family? Was she really just, another supporter, making sure the meals are, the typical kind of what's the word I'm looking, nuclear family where dad works and, maybe is even greater in terms of status than the average nuclear family. And then mom kind of takes care of the home. Was that the kind of setup that you guys had?
Well, certainly that was the veneer, right? Mommy is a great housewife and that's what she does. I mean, the truth of the matter is both of my parents were living the kind of life I understand Jason Sugarman, his brother, and all those guys lived, which is to say they lived a party lifestyle, devoid of adult responsibilities, at least to the kids. I mean, I talk about this in the book. I was raised by what we called the hired help. And that wasn't people you might imagine. I mean, those were street people from the surrounding areas. And in Greenwich, that's New York City. So I was raised by, I had a black brother who lived with us. I was also raised by an El Salvadorian man. I had a Mormon nanny. I mean, it was a very strange existence. My parents would float in and out of that as it was convenient to them, because in this world, self-interest is the main governor. What is good for me right now? And that goes for my mom and my dad. And usually taking care of kids is not high on the list of what is good for me right now. So they hired that off to other people, which made my childhood pretty strange. And then, of course, that was all ripped away when the feds kicked in the door. And then we sort of became a more nuclear family, but with a lot of dysfunction. I mean, there was a lot of physical abuse between my older brother and my mother. I go into that in my book, and it took years of trying to analyze it and understanding it. But I came to understand that in some way my mom craved that abuse herself. And there is a dysfunction with people like that. Now, by the way, I want to make note of something. I was in Brooklyn, MDC on this case that I went on for my family again. And I ran into an author. He was an old drug dealer. He'd been down 30 years, and he wrote a couple books. And he saw me write about that in my book, and he said, "You can't put that in there. The women groups are going to be all over you." I said, "Listen, I'm sorry. I'm going to put in what I saw. And I'm not going to put in something that's untrue, because I spent a lifetime trying to understand that abusive dynamic between my brother and my mother, and of course my father. And I'm left with little answers at this time."
That must have been. It's so speaking out and as honestly as you're doing it, I have to give you so much credit, Eric. I mean, that takes a lot. It takes a lot.
Thank you. I mean, I was at the end of my rope. I would either become essentially like my mother, and the poor woman was sort of a slave of that situation, or I was going to break out on my own. And I had already done inside 11 years in prison, 15 years in sentences, protecting all of them. And by the way, I want to make sure you understand something else too. I probably earned over the course, with prison included, less than $50,000 a year.
Wow.
Those guys, those underground financiers, I'm talking Sugarman, I'm talking my brother, I'm talking my father, the money is for them. And if you get any crumbs falling to the floor, well, that's all you get.
So what was your role then?
So I had various roles over time. I can tell you I went to Kosovo right after the war. And we were starting an insurance business. And anybody who's been in those type of situations, I'm sure Afghanistan was the same. There is a ton of money floating around, not just from NGOs, but from governments themselves looking to support countries. So there are fortunes to be made in situations like that. And I had a situation with the insurance company where we were very close to that. A couple of the really seedy moves my father made stopped that. But that's what I was doing there, and I was running that business. Now, the problem is, that lasted about 2 years before I came back. Then I got busted on my drug case. And the drug case was with a friend of my father's, someone he met at Terminal Island, where my father and brother both reside today. My father and brother were both aware of it. I protected them both. I thought it was my duty and my honor to do so. I thought, they love me and they care about me. I need to do this. They threatened me with 20 years. They tried to give me 20 years. They got 11. I used 9. I did about 6.5. Long story short, I get out. I get involved in another rope scam with them, and they rob me on that. It's sort of no thought as to, hey, this guy just protected us with his own body, with his life. The money's for us. It's not for him. I mean, it's a very weird, megalomaniacal way of looking at the world these guys have. And by the way, I think that contributed to the situation with Heidi.
Right. And so a lot of what you're saying is like ringing bells, right? For me, like the political ties, that's something that's not new in my opinion, but often people people assume that because someone politically is involved, who is, you know, a governor or a mayor or related to the president, exactly, that it means that, oh, it's safe, it's a good business, but that's not the case. It's business. Business is business. So whether they had insight into those, you know, fraudulent activities, I don't know. But for you, your role, my question is, so did you know, like, so were you on paper someone like Heidi, for example, where someone could look it up and maybe your father and brother were a little more hidden, or like, how did that work? Like, how did they protect themselves from being pointed out as criminals?
Okay, so let me start with your first point, because I think it's very important. You know, they were absolutely using Hunter Biden as the veneer of legitimacy, right? People think, well, the president's son is involved, everything is great. You know, and that is an old tactic. I write about in Greed and Fear. Kevin Washington was the son of Dennis Washington. Dennis Washington is in the Forbes 400 every year. He's a billionaire. And Kevin was quoted in a Forbes article that was reporting on a pump and dump we were doing. Well, I can tell you this, that case never went to trial. The SEC never investigated. They left it alone. Why did they do that? Well, they did that because Kevin Washington was involved. You know, they didn't want to wreck the boat of the elite, so to speak, right? So now, 20 years later, Hunter Biden's involved, and they sort of take this tact of, well, you know, Jason has a record now. We can't really ignore this. So they arrest all of them, and they conspicuously leave Hunter off the indictment. Now, Hunter was on the promotional materials. You know, normally, if you're a normal citizen, I don't care whether you know or you don't know. If you're on the promotional materials, right, and your business is involved, your business partner, Devin Archer, is involved, you're going to jail. Unless, of course, in this case, your name is Hunter Biden. Now, you know, let me switch to the other question you had. After my drug case, I wasn't valuable to them to be the face of a business, right? Anyone with a record can't be that. So my role switched to manipulating the various members of our scams, who most of them thought it was legal, of course, what we were doing. And my brother and father did the same thing. After my brother's conviction on Penthouse, or at least suspension from the SEC, he looked to hide himself behind people. And listen, everyone's looking to get rich. There's no shortage of people you can hide behind that will let you speak for them, that will let you use their name. They're a dime a dozen.
And so what were some of those manipulative tactics that you guys would typically use to con people into believing what you were doing was legitimate?
Well, look, so let's talk about the Indian bond fraud, right, that Jason was involved in. It's my father and brother's favorite scam, and it takes different forms. But the bottom line is this, and I hope I don't get too technical. If I do, jump in and stop me. So you can buy money managers, registered investment advisors, for pennies on the dollar. So if an investment advisor has about $100 million under management, you can usually buy him for about a couple $1,000,000. And I don't want to get into the reasons why that's true, just that the manager's only making about $1 million. There's a tremendous amount of client and market risk involved. So you only get about 2 times earnings, right?
But you're taking the risk, right?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. So look at this. So if you want to buy $1 billion of investment advisors, if that's $2 million a pop, what are we getting to? About $10 million or 20 or whatever it is. But then you have $1 billion under management. Now, what guys like Sugarman and what guys like my brother do is they divert that money to their own ends. In this case, they use the Indians to cover their tracks for what they're wanting to do. But all the moves were in growing that investment advisor, getting $1 billion of assets under management, where then they can go put it in a movie or a basketball team and siphon off the money and act like they're legitimate money managers. It's the oldest scam on Wall Street.
Oh, interesting. So if I understand, sorry, Don, if I can just quickly ask, because I really want to understand this. So on paper, because they had hired all these, independent agents or whatever, and they all kind of control assets that may be worth a big pool of money, to the public, to people who are potential investors, they may think, oh, you're already managing all this money, when the reality is you don't have any of that liquidated anywhere, right? And so you're using that to essentially trick them into believing that you're bigger than you are, when really you have very little control over, what assets exist where. Is that right?
Well, yeah, just those numbers involved alone, right? You can be an investment advisor making a living of about $1 million a year, right? But you can go around and say, I have $100 million of assets under management. And it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
So you have 100 times leverage of your purchasing power, if you will. Now, if the guy is ethical, he's going to try to invest that money in the best investments to make money for his clients to earn that $1 million. But the problem is guys like Sugarman, guys like my brother and father, they're not ethical at all. They are looking to rob that money from that investment advisor and look like they're still managing it.
Mm-hmm. So that leads me to, did you guys ever work with, actually, I'll back up here because I want to understand this. So you said your father and your brother are they currently in prison right now?
Yeah, they're in Terminal Island in Long Beach.
Okay. And so are they still are they in maximum prison? Like, do you have any contact with them? Does anyone have any contact with them from prison?
No, well, let me say this. No, whenever anyone asks me, I say, go ahead and write them. See if you can contact Jason. Jason, Terminal Island was a medium. It is a low right now. It's a prison. It's not a camp. It is a prison. And you can write him and see what he has to say. I know that he gave information on Jason Sugarman, probably partly responsible for the indictment civilly of Sugarman. But listen, one of the things about that, I'm not saying Sugarman isn't as bad as my brother. I'm sure he is, but that's what all those guys do. They will all stab each other in the back because really they're just using each other to make more money. The same way my father and brother used me.
Right. And so is there bad blood between, because Sugarman, he was in some way involved, and I personally don't fully understand how he was involved in the tribal scheme, but what was the relationship like with your brother and your father, if that's relevant, with Sugarman, and did that change after they went to prison?
Well, okay, so let me be honest. I don't have any contact with my father and brother. They're very upset about the book. Guys like that live on image, and although they like to cultivate the bad boyness that they're connected to organized crime, they certainly don't want all their secrets spilled on the street. So, what I did was I opened the can of worms. I said, this is what you really are. By the way, Jason Sugarman, I guarantee you, knew absolutely every step of the scam. He's smart enough to conceptualize, wow, we're building $1 billion empire, which we then can use to invest in whatever we want. I mean, he'd have to be an idiot not to understand that. But many of these things are tacit, right? You don't wink at Jason Sugarman and say, yeah, we're going to rip these people off. They're all idiots. No, you pretend like you're building a financial conglomerate. But the end game for all those underground financiers is to enrich themselves and, basically rape the fund.
Right. Go ahead, Tom.
And by the way, so let's close the circles on this because I know what you guys are interested in. What was Heidi's role in that? Well, Heidi, probably being the accountant, knew certain things that other people did not know. Heidi had information that other people may have not known. Jason told her to do this. Jason told her to do that. And that information was probably Sugarman was very started. I don't know. I mean, but it certainly is. It is a question with his indictment.
Yeah, you actually you cut out there a little bit, but in terms of the information that Heidi would know, it's common knowledge just in the media that she was very worried leading up to the day that she disappeared. She was concerned that her name was on all these documents related to Sugarman, and she was coming to the understanding of the gravity of the fact that she was on paper like that.
And that was just days before her disappearance. It started to hit her, I'm told.
So first of all, I have to ask, what is your background? Because you are so well spoken.
Yeah, definitely.
You are extremely eloquent in your speech, and I'll be honest, you don't look like someone who would who would be someone with such eloquent words. And so, do you mind do you have a degree in finance? Like, do you have a PhD or BFA or?
So let me close the circle for you between what I sound like and what I look like. I was muscle for my family. We dealt with organized crime a lot, right? My first case was a drug case. I dealt with those people. That was what was delegated to me by my father. Now, that having been said, I have a college degree in history. I was educated in a master's program in securities in England. I went to the New York Institute of Finance. I'm educated.
There it is.
At the same time, I've also spent 11 years of my adult life in prison. I think that wears on a man physically. And I can be nice and I can be not nice. And that's really what we're talking about with this case. Those God-type guys, my brother, my father, and probably we're going to get to this, but my brother and father planned on killing me. Why did they plan on killing me? They planned on killing me because they had ripped off the money on Jarova and they didn't want to pay me. And by the way, on their mind, I just want to put this to you, they didn't think they owed me anything. And the way they looked at the world, forget the fact that Derek just took 20 years in a drug case for us. We don't care. We used Derek and that's the end of it. And that's how those guys think. Now, this, with our current case with Heidi, Heidi, I imagine, was saying some things to Jason Sugarman. And I'm sure Jason Sugarman had the same apotheosis with Heidi that our father had with us. And Heidi was saying, hey, Jason, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble here. What about this? What about that? And it probably concerned Jason. And it probably got to the point where Jason said, hey, we can't have this girl talking. And, is there another suspect? Unless it's some random issue in LA, which doesn't look likely with the building involvement and everything else, then it was Sugarman.
And that's kind of where we were unfortunately coming to. We started in that direction and we're like, okay, let's look at all the businesses, let's see whatever. And then we expanded our reach and just checked basically everyone. And now we're coming full circle. And especially with you, it really feels like that could be the case. So my question to you, being involved, being the person who was targeted, first of all, what was this drug case? Because it seems interesting that they're financial people and they're doing business with travel bonds and whatever, but then suddenly there's a drug case. And then my second question is, and I can ask you again because both of these could lead to many conversations, but how did you catch wind of the fact that that was planned? Like,
Good questions. And by the way, everyone asks at least the second one. So let me start with the first one. So where did that come from? My father was in Terminal Island 20 years ago, same place, go figure. And he sent home a man named Dennis Alba. Dennis Alba was a drug dealer. But Dennis Alba was also trying to get involved in the finance business with my father because he knew there's a lot of money in it. Now, Dennis, as soon as he got out and started working with me, my brother, was already importing ecstasy from his formula from China. I was 20 years old, and you can imagine I thought that was really neat. I was a kid. Now, at the same time, Dennis was working on a business we had called the credit store. Now, 3 years on, we sold the credit store for quite a lot of money. Dennis received nothing. And Dennis used to kind of storm around the office and say exactly what I just said to you. With Jason and John, you're lucky to get some crumbs. That is when Dennis shifted his attention from the finance business with us. I mean, he kept the veneer of it and pretended that he was the IT guy, but shifted full in to his ecstasy manufacturing operation. And it got quite large. When we were busted, it was the largest ecstasy manufacturing operation in the United States. I mean, most of the ecstasy came from Europe at that time. How did I get involved in it? I came back from Kosovo. The insurance business had failed. And Dennis Alba, and by the way, I had sold drugs for Dennis in college, when I was 20. I thought it was really neat. It was actually really stupid. I thought I was Al Capone. I was actually a little kid getting involved in something I didn't know. And I get back from Kosovo, and Dennis says, "Hey, Derek, can you sell some of this to Tommy Gambino?" I knew the Gambinos from the same place, from Terminal Island. Rosario had two sons, Tommy and Tony, perfect foils for me and my brother. And my father constantly tried to get us involved with Tommy and Tony. So I propositioned Tommy in New York. And then I called Dennis and I said, "It's a go. I got it. Don't worry." Well, the DEA was listening. And, the problem is, in the government cases, drug cases particularly, DEA, a Gambino connection is about the top of the world for them. And they desperately wanted me to roll over. And they were very brutal about it. They invaded my mother's house, pretended it was the Gambinos. They abused me when they talked to me. And, the thing was, I was very young. I was very hard-headed. But I need to admit, I haven't changed much. If you try those tactics with me, you're not going to win. And so I went to jail for that drug case. By the way, my brother and father knew what was happening. My brother was involved. He offered to finance it. I protected them both. Little did I know that, that protection was not appreciated in any way. What was your second question was?
How did you catch wind of the fact that they were trying to kill you?
Okay, so fast forward through Jarova, right? The crime that I went to jail for, to the Indian bond fraud. John and Jason are both going down. What happens in those situations? Well, the underground financiers try to start stabbing each other. So my brother comes to me, and in a very slick way, as only he can do, because you think I'm articulate, you should hear Jason. He basically intimates, Dad tried to have you whacked, and I stopped him. I told him, we can't whack family. That's not right. What he was trying to do was get me to be angry at my father because his spin to the court and to the judges was that the Indian bond fraud was all Daddy's fault.
Right.
And by the way, that's what he went into court with. That's what he tried to go to court with. And, Ronnie Abrams, the lady who gave Devin Archer, Hunter Biden's partner in new trial, said to my brother, I believe you, except you're 50 years old. You can't blame your dad for this anymore. But, that's how those guys do it. They blame each other. They will use each other. And that's how I caught wind of it.
And so, and maybe you can't talk about this, but in your time working with your family, did you know if and when people were whacked?
No, listen. So let me make this clear. No, I mean, my father, and I put this in the book, so I'll talk about it. My father asked me to kill someone, and then changed his mind shortly thereafter. I was young. I mean, who knows what I would have done had he hadn't. So I'm glad he did change his mind. But with Sugarman, we're talking about a different situation. The only reason my father didn't have people killed wasn't because of a moral issue of taking a life. My father simply knew that the penalties for that changed considerably. You're not going to get out of jail anymore. Now, let's go back to the way these people feel about other people. I guarantee you that Sugarman felt about Heidi the same way my brother and father felt about me, meaning you owe everything to me. You are an idiot, and I have given you everything. I have enriched you. You have lived a life you cannot live without me.
Yeah.
And that's that. And that's how they feel. Now, Sugarman also has another layer, right? My family, we were more or less known criminals, right? Sugarman was part of society.
Yeah.
You know, he married to a goober.
Still is.
Yeah, you bet. So it's a much different thing. Suddenly, Jason is worried about losing that status.
Yeah.
So would that push a man to do something crazy?
Well, and what I was like, I've been kicking around in my head was, I don't think he would do it personally. I don't even think he would ask someone close to him for them to do it personally. But would he go underground and find someone who could make it seem as if it was random or something like that?
Well, what I was very worried about was they were going to take a homeless person in LA and stick it on them. You know, and it doesn't look like it's going that way. And let me just say why. Look, you can play that game if you want to, but as soon as you have a problem in that building, we're talking about a much different case. And Sugarman has ties to that building. And, you know, I think the reason the police are going so slow is because it is such an important thing not to accuse someone of the establishment of a crime without all the evidence in order. Yeah. And by the way, maybe it wasn't Sugarman. Maybe Heidi was dating someone from that internet company you talked about with ties to Sugarman. I don't know, but it had something to do with that building, clearly.
Do you know specifically what ties he has to that building? Because there's so much going on there at that building.
No. I mean, look, I'm not privy to those inside facts. Right. So I do understand the Bank of California had something to do with the financing.
The purchase.
You start there, and that's a real problem. I mean, his bank built the building. I mean, you know, it also, here's something very interesting I want to bring up.
Didn't it fund the tribal bond scheme too?
They received the proceeds of the tribal bond scheme because they were going to go buy more money managers to leverage that money, right? But you know, the house of cards fell down early with that. But there's a point I want to make. Look, I was in prison in Taft, California. It was a private prison. They closed it. Real nice place. I would say the elite of LA went there. And a man named Jonathan Schwartz was there, who was a manager for various rock and roll stars in LA. He had been robbing their money. The Sugarmans put him on the board of the Bank of California. And I talked to Jonathan Schwartz in Taft. He told me the Sugarmans were the same type of underground financiers as my father and brother. They like to party. They like to have a good time. They like to use drugs. And by the way, that building has that same reputation.
Yeah. They're finding that out.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot of information, and it kind of lines up exactly how we have been thinking lately about the case, potentially. The thing is, we don't know how she's connected to the building. We know there are tons of cannabis companies that operate out of there or have that listed as their address.
Well, like you said, the gamers.
The gamers are there. We know that Sugarman was heavily invested in crypto in some way. And cryptocurrency is like no man's land. They didn't have like a task force, an SEC task force that would look at crypto companies until early October.
You know, the Staples Center is now Crypto Center, the crypto.com stadium or whatever they're calling it now. But yeah, they've changed. I mean, it's big in esports, and he has a big hand in that.
And they're cracking down on it.
And there are some that live there up, you know, in the higher.
So if he already has experience in Ponzi schemes, it seems to me like he's probably, at the very least, able to replicate that in different areas of business, you know, whether it's crypto, real estate, and the rest, financial institute, banks, you know, whatever. It seems like very much like your father. He's like, okay, here's an opportunity for money here. Let's get in there and see what we can do. And so I guess.
Yeah, no, listen, guys. So, as an example, let's say you own one of those funds, right? You buy one of those funds, you can then invest it in a crypto company and then
Mhm.
filter the money out. There's no business that's off the table to those guys. Absolutely.
Yeah, speaking of business, can I ask, I'd like to ask you something really quickly. So regarding Devin Archer and Sugarman, so they have started a new corporation that is replacing, basically they just changed the Camden or the Camden name, correct?
Yeah. No, they changed. It was a different one, but they changed it to the Change Company.
The Change Company.
Yeah.
Headed up by Sugarman, Archer, a few other names I recognized. And I'm just thinking, is that them recycling and doing it again?
Well, hold on. I've got to ask a question. You mean Devin Archer and Jason Sugarman are still in business together today?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So,
As of recently.
very, very interesting. Look, what that means is that they're going to use the platform that my brother and father used as if as true criminals. They're going to use it with their elite status because both Sugarman and Archer have ties to the elite. And I'm sure they're going to do the exact same thing, cover their tracks a little bit better, make investments that are a little bit more sound, but they can still rape those funds all the same. It's a joke. The elite never has to pay for their crimes. Now, that having been said, look, it is horrible what happened to Heidi, but I don't think it is very difficult to hide a body. If Jason had something to do with this, I expect it to come out.
Good.
Well, and the what we're seeing right now of them, excavating like the
landfill.
The landfill. Yeah. I mean, that's would it like I guess like my lack of insight is around planning to take someone out, right? Like, was she being followed? Was she at that building to get her lashes done, for example? We've heard whispers of that. Maybe she had a friend there that she was just going to visit and she was being followed by someone who had the plan to take her out or something like that. I guess your brother seemed to quite casually mention, oh yeah, Dad was planning on taking you out. Like, to me, that's very jarring.
It wasn't that was normal conversation.
Wow.
Okay.
Well,
that's really interesting.
Yeah. Figuring out.
Remember something too about these types. You're talking about ego and God complexes.
Yes.
What is the ultimate power over human? It's taking their life. I am in charge of you, quite literally. I control your entire life. And by the way, that's how those guys feel anyway. Look, I'm no doubt Sugarman didn't dirty his hands himself. Did he have a guy, I don't know, let's say who looked like me that filled my role in his organization in crypto and convinced this guy that he needed to do it? And by the way, will that guy now take the fall for it? Will they say it was a lover thing and then Sugarman takes care of his family for the rest of his life? It's going to be very interesting how it all rolls out.
Yeah, because he did have that over Heidi. She was in a very vulnerable situation. She was a single mom and I don't think she realized the gravity of what she was being asked to do, but she did it. And she knew that was her lifeline. That was her son, being able to take care of her son, having a home, a stable home, and the constant trying to measure up to the dad. For a single mom is the dynamics there. I believe that it wouldn't have taken much for him to hold all of that over her head at any time, and I'm sure he did. He definitely, I'm sure, treated her like she owed him all the time.
Well, and
without
the other thing I was going to ask you about, maybe you have insight about this, is that from what I hear, she was paid around, what was it, $125,000 a year, which in LA dollars isn't all that much. But she was also given bonuses, random bonuses. It seems like. Now, is that that's to you, that's normal, like that.
Yep,
You've
absolutely normal. I would get money that covered my bills, and then I would get presents. I was treated the same way Heidi was treated with all these scams. I mean, the only difference may have been for me, I mean, I knew what was going on. But, listen, the one thing about me is I'm not greedy. I thought in my mind, we're a family. This is what we do together. I don't really value material things like that, so it doesn't matter to me. Was I naive? Absolutely. Was Heidi naive? Yeah, even more so. I don't think Heidi realized crimes were being committed.
And I guess my other question related to that is, a big question in my mind is, why were her location services turned off? On her phone, on her car, maybe they were never set up, on her computer, everything was turned off. So someone had access to that, or she didn't want to be found. So
I wasn't aware she bought the car.
Yeah, and is that so? And that as well, like, is that normal? Like, would you guys, as like the controllers of the company or the higher ups or whatever, have kind of eyes on what everyone's doing at all times to protect yourselves?
Well, look, I mean, most of it is the relationship, is your control of the levers you've already talked about. The rest of it, which, my father calls that the James Bond stuff, is very rare. Now, the fact that Heidi had all that stuff turned off is a scary thought. Did Sugarman manipulate her to turn them off, acting like, we've got to be careful, let's turn this off? And maybe she didn't even really understand what being careful meant, and what Sugarman really was doing was setting her up to get her in some place, and this is what happened to her. I could absolutely see my brother and father doing that. They're masters of that game. And, look, just like the mob world, your best friend is the one who kills you. The underground financier world is no different. It's you're the people you love, that you count on, that give you all your money, that are going to lead you to your demise. And it certainly seems that's what happened with Heidi, with Jason Sugarman.
I can't disagree. Everything you're saying is just kind of raising all these red flags, and it connects everything, honestly.
It does,
well, okay, so look, you guys, I know, and my wife too, you guys were at first, the ex-husband. And by the way, on that note, that is a police policy as well, right? Because normally in these situations, that is what happened. It's a crime of passion.
And to not look at that would be a mistake, yeah. However,
yeah, but what people don't know about, and this is what I tried to get across in my book, people don't really understand this class of criminal I'm talking about. The mafiosos everybody knows about, right? They understand what they do and how they do it, and they watch movies about it. Underground financiers get to masquerade as legitimate businessmen. And why is that? Because the rich and powerful use the same scams that they use. And by the way, Sugarman continuing on with Archer is exactly that. I'm sure they're like, oh, we got rid of those scummy Greeks, the Galanis family. Let's continue on, brother. And really, they're going to do the exact same thing.
How are they allowed to do business again? I don't get it.
I can't. I was just going to say, I can't seem to confirm that Archer is still involved. That's something I every time I look at the who's on the actual papers. Good. So that was one thing.
I'm on here.
And the other thing was the reason. So we actually started looking at the work, and then we saw the court documents that were released, and it just like dragged Heidi through hell. Basically, just like painted her as a bad mom, as psychosis, a drug dealer, or using drugs, had all these issues. And we kept saying, God, we really want to hear her part of the story. And when we finally got our hands on that, it became very clear to us. And I won't apologize for what we've done. And I know that's not you weren't saying that we needed to or whatever. You kind of agree with looking at the person who's most likely to have done it. But he was mean to her, and he really tormented her for many, many years. And so we felt it was a duty to bring the other side of that. Now, when we release that, we want to say, listen, we don't think Jim is involved. We don't. Do we think that he's behaved in a way that like doesn't paint him as a very kind character. Absolutely.
Definitely
But
worth some scrutiny. However,
yeah, but he cares about his son, and his son's mom is someone important to Bond. And so there's no doubt in my mind that, he would do what's best for his son, and that involves taking care of Heidi and making sure she's okay. And so him keeping the laptop and the electronics for a week, at the beginning, I was like, that's suspicious. Like, why would you do that? Why would you not hand it over to the police? But if you knew that she might still be alive and you wanted to protect her from further issues after she's found, if she's hiding on her own, then that kind of makes sense, to keep it. And, unless requested, like, then I'll hand it over. But it's, not worth putting her in that situation otherwise. So I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, look, if it turns out that somehow Jim is involved, and by the way, I don't believe that he is, and this is just a regular old, crime of passion between ex-spouses, okay. Do I think that that's likely? No, I do not. I think that Sugarman is somehow involved. I mean, all the steps are there. I mean, my book is an outline to this happening. And it's really sad that nobody wants to take a clean look at these guys. Let's give another example. You want another underground financier? Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really, it rings for me every time.
Yeah, especially the people who are involved, who make him, they surround him and they give him validity as someone who's a good person, hanging out with presidents and, stars and whatnot. But the reality is he was a dirty, disgusting human being who had a lot of secrets.
He made his first 20, 30 million by ripping off the guy who entrusted him, who owned Victoria's Secret. I mean, just literally straight ripping him off. I mean, that was his business model, just like my father and my brother.
And so and how was it that your brother and father ended up going to prison? Did they tried to pin it on you to go to prison as well, or in place?
So it's funny like that. Well, look, I went to prison on the Drova stock swindle, which was before the Indian bond fraud. I will tell you, though, it's very interesting. In the lead up, just as my brother blamed my father, there was an attempt to switch blame to me. And my brother was basically offering to compensate me for going to jail for him. And by the way, the government considered it because my brother painted me in a light that would make them consider it. For instance, one of the prosecutors we had was a woman. Her name was Rebecca Mermelstein. My brother sold her the bag of goods that I physically abused women. Now, my brother physically abused my mother and probably his first 5, 6 girlfriends, and I'm sure his wife as well. He was the one who had that pathology, not me. I never had that pathology, but it made the female prosecutor angry enough to think, okay, well, let's look at Derek then. He sounds like a really bad guy. And you guys have already commented on the way I look, right? It doesn't take too much of a step. They go, he looks like a really bad guy too. And so they tried that. The problem was, and this is, to me, I put this in the book, and to me it's humorous. If I had gotten my cut of the Indian bond fraud and of Drova, which probably would have been around $3-4 million total, Jason probably could have traded all his jail time to me. And by the way, I was such a loving, loyal brother, I would have done it for him. But because he robbed me, the government can't make that leap. They said, well, the guy got no money. How do we blame him?
Yeah, that's true. Why would the guy with no money be responsible?
Yeah. How do we make sense of this? Oh, the guy with the multi-million-dollar Bel Air mansion and plus Tribeca apartment in New York City is the one who's innocent, and this ruffian brother is guilty. I mean, come on. It's at the end of the day, these underground financiers will sell you anything. It's like my brother trying to say it's my dad's fault. Well, listen, my dad affected both our lives, no doubt. But when you're 50 years old, you can't say it's daddy's fault anymore.
Yeah. Right. Yep. Wow. Well, I mean, that's
that's really all I have for you. I think that's a lot to digest. Anything else, Dawn, that you wanted to?
Not right now, but I'm just. Would you be willing to talk with us again, or I'm trying to. I was trying to find that document, and now I've lost you. Because I think that we have a little bit of research to do. And I think that, I think that we'd really like to revisit this.
Guys, I am here whenever you need me. Let's wait for the case to develop as well. And if things come out, I am always here for you. Look, I've been trying to draw attention to these type of criminals for a long time, and nobody was listening. And, now we've got Jeffrey Epstein. Now we potentially have Jason Sugarman. Hopefully people start waking up, and I'm always here for you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was really nice meeting you. And like I said, you're such a well-spoken, friendly, warm person. And I didn't expect that. And that's not to knock you. You're a strong man. I would never want to get on your bad side. We'll put it that way. And I understand why they tried to kind of make you the face of all their bad dealings, especially as when you look at the pictures of your brother floating around, they look like businessmen and, white collar, and haven't lifted a weight in years. And here you are, you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure you could, bench 600 pounds or whatever if I asked you to do it right now. So all that to say, I'm just, I'm super grateful that you took the time to speak with us.
Yeah, beyond that, I think it takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. And it takes courage to bring attention to something like this. And that's exactly what you guys are doing. I mean, look, nobody would hear me if it wasn't for you guys. And thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you so much.
We'll be in touch.
Okay, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Derek.
Bye.